Welcome to DNA Behavior. Today we'll be doing a team facilitation example. We'll give you a walkthrough of how to do a team facilitation, how to prepare for it, and what people use these team facilitations for. So often people have a team that is new coming together and they want to get to know each other more quickly. Or perhaps there's a team that has been working together for a while and has a new member coming in that they want to incorporate quickly. Or perhaps the team isn't really working together as well as they would like to, and they'd like to find ways to meet on common ground a little bit more. And so you can use the DNA team report to help you understand where each team member is coming from, get some common language for how you might work together. So I'm going to walk through the components of the team report and how you might prepare for using the team report as a facilitator. So after you've generated a team report from your system, you've gone into your admin system, you have chosen the people that you want to see on the team report by selecting the checkboxes next to each team member. You will see this area in the system where you will see kind of a roll-up of all of the styles on the team that you've chosen, and then you'll click the team report button. You'll enter a name for the team that you're choosing and a leader for that team, and then click Generate Report. And that will bring you to this view where you can actually see the team report. So going into planning to facilitate for a team report, you want to think about what is the goal of the event? What are you trying to find out? So in this case, let's say that we've got Chris Coddington, the leader, and his chief operating officer is John Smith. And Chris and John John is new to the team, but he's trying to take over operations of the team, where Chris has been maybe running the team in the past. And he's now brought on John to help him with operations. So let's look at how John's addition to the team might impact the team overall and who he'll be more easily working with right from the start and who he may take a little bit longer to assimilate to or have to take a little bit more effort to work with. So when you first get to the report, what you're going to see are the unique styles for the team and the strongest factors. And the reason you want to look at the strongest behavioral factors for your team members is because it gives you a really good idea of what are their real behavioral strengths. So their top two strongest behavioral traits are going to be the strongest behaviors. They're going to be the ones that you see under stress most often. And they're going to be the ones that when they're working using the skills of these traits, they're going to be at their best. So you want to try to make sure that people are working in their talents and strengths as much as possible. So you see here the unique style for each person on the team, and then each of their top two behavioral traits. So if we're thinking about John and Chris, Chris is a strategist who's very pioneering and risk-taking, where John is more cautious and skeptical. So cautious and risk-taking are opposite behavioral traits. And so you're going to see there this push and pull. And so potentially that's why Chris hired him, is that he wanted somebody to counterbalance his strong risk-taking. It could also end up being an obstacle for them that they have these opposing strengths. We're going to see as we continue what exactly that looks like, but that gives you a really good idea of kind of where people's strengths are and what their unique style is. And as you get more familiar with unique styles, that'll tell you an awful lot about the people on the team. Next, you'll see the results and relationship focus for each team member. So this doesn't mean that people are only results focused or only relationship focused, but it tends to be sort of their initial focus. So here in a team of 9, you see that there's a pretty even split on the team of relationally focused profiles and results focused profiles. Now, what you might notice is that sometimes people with the same style, one will be a results focused and one might be more relationally focused. And that's because this results and relationship calculation is done at the unique individual score level. And so sometimes you'll have similar enough scores to be in the same style, but slightly different focus scores for your results and relationship score. So here we see that on Chris's team, he's got a pretty balanced mix of results and relationship oriented profiles. So that could be really good for his team. So that what that will mean is with relationship focused profiles, they're going to be the ones who have an easy time connecting with people, are able to get people engaged and involved in new ideas, are able to be empathetic listeners with team members and help to match. So you want to make sure that you've got people that are good in this area that can build long-term relationships. They're going to be good in customer service. They're going to be good in terms of engaging people to want to follow along with what you're doing. Where your results focused team members are going to be much more bottom line focused. They're going to be very focused on delivery and making sure that things are happening. And so again, not that they don't care about relationships, but their main drive is going to be to get results. And so having a good balance of this means that you've got people that are going to connect with your customers and connect with your team, and then also people that are driving to make sure that productivity is staying up and that results are happening. So it's nice to see a balance here of results and relationship focus. On some teams, maybe you'll see a tilt where you've got maybe much more results focused and very little relationship focused. If that's the case, then maybe your team is very good at delivery, but has a hard time relating to other teams, or maybe your messages are getting missed because you're not relational enough with other teams. It doesn't mean that you have to change up the team, but maybe you're going to have to put more effort into building some of those relationships and being more relationally focused. On the other side, maybe you're a very relational team. Everybody loves your team. Everybody loves working with your team. But maybe there's a little bit of frustration getting things across the line. Maybe things aren't being delivered as consistently and as they should be. And so, again, leaning more to a results focus for some of those relationally focused team members may be what's needed to make sure that you're also delivering on all of those great promises that you've made in building relationships. So that's a place to start. So as a facilitator, I'm looking at a team that's fairly well balanced here in results and relationship. Being 9 team members, they're going to have this is as balanced as it gets. So I think, walking in, you can ask the team, how does that sound to you? How do people relate to you? How does this show up in your day-to-day activities with one another? And then here you're going to see a summary of the makeup on the team. So with this team of 9 people, you've got really 8 different styles working here. And so it is a very unique team. It's very unique that, especially if there was one hiring manager that they've hired for all these different behavioral styles. Often you find teams that are fairly heavy on one style, especially if they've been established in an organization for a long time. So you may find that with a hiring manager who's been with an organization for a while, we tend to hire people that are like us. So you will likely find teams that aren't quite as diverse as this team, unless you've really been selective for behavioral diversity on a team. We often tend to find teams that are skewed toward one behavioral style or another. And so because we tend to have the easiest time adapting to people that are just like us, people that think like us, people that talk and communicate like us are the easiest ones for us to work with. And so they tend to be the ones that we relate to easiest. So they do the best in our job interviews and in our initial conversations. And so that's just something to keep in mind. This team is very behaviorally diverse. So whether that was by accident or merger or intentional, that's something to call out on this team. There's a strength in having so much behavioral diversity on the team, but that can also lead to some challenge because everybody's kind of got their own groove about how they do work. And so we'll look at that as we continue with the report. This graphic is just to help you understand how might you have to flex to work with one another. So a facilitator working with another facilitator is going to have an easy time, more easy with a community builder, relationship builder, adapter. So those facilitators are going to have an easier time with that. They're going to have to do some adjustments with reflective thinkers and engagers. And then they'll have a harder time and need to do even more flexing to work well with influencers, initiators, strategists, and stylish thinkers. So it just means they have to put a little bit more effort into flexing either their results focus or relationship focus or their pacing, the fast-paced versus more careful. So just something to think about here. Sometimes that helps people understand how much modification they need to be able to work together. So again, this kind of summarizes each of those styles for you so you have it very easily as you're looking at that guide. Alan is a community builder, so he's gonna, in relationship with Chris, who's the strategist. So if I look at community builder here with a strategist, that's a pretty decent behavioral flex, some modification, the most modification that needs to happen in that relationship. So just something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that they won't work really well together. They just need to be mindful of their differences. So then we move on to really looking at the makeup of the team. So here you're looking at take charge and cooperative. So here you've really got Chris Coddington very, very strong on take charge. So he's the visionary of the team. He's setting the direction. He's setting the leadership. He's making the decisions. And then you've got some folks on the team that are very much cooperators. They're very practical. They're following the agenda. They're keeping the peace on the team. And then you've got some folks that are kind of in that mid-range. So scores above 50 are going to fall on the take charge side. So 50 and above. So Doug and Matt and Bobby in this example will fall out on the take charge side on their individual reports. But they are nowhere near as strong on that take charge as Chris Coddington is. So those scores in the mid-range, what that means is that those folks have the easiest time flexing that behavior. So it's easy for Doug and Matt and Bobby to flex and be more cooperative, or to lean into that take charge that's a little bit more natural for them. For Chris, it's very difficult for him to flex to be very cooperative. And it's very difficult for Carol and Alan and John and Tom to flex to be very take charge. So if their roles were reversed, so John, in this example, our new COO, he's very cooperative. And so getting him to take charge and command the team is going to be a behavioral flex for John. Matt and Doug and Bobby are going to tend to have an easier time with that take charge, but John is going to have to put some effort into being that decision maker. So he and Chris can maybe talk about how does, Chris maybe set the direction and then John get people to collaborate to make that vision come true. So rather than John setting the direction, he's taking that direction from Chris and then rallying the team behind that vision. What will work well here is that John is probably not going to wrestle with Chris for control of that direction and authority. What they may struggle with is that if John is sort of second in command, that Bobby and Doug and Matt and even Melanie are higher take charge than he is. And so they may tend to resist, they may tend to want to exercise that take charge muscle more so than John. And so there's going to have to be that kind of balance that you're looking for. So this is how I prepare, kind of looking through each of the factors. So you see here, when I chose the leader of the team, that leader is now going to be highlighted so that you can see the leader in relationship to everybody else. So again, a big difference here with Chris and John. Chris being extremely reserved, very serious, very difficult to read, probably more thoughtful and less inclined to speak up in meetings, where John is going to be very expressive and outgoing. He's going to be a great connector with people, and he may share ideas out loud to really fully understand what he's thinking about something. Under stress, he's going to want to talk things out. Under stress, Chris is going to want to kind of clam up a little bit. So they're going to have to work that out. What does that look like? Who can John go to talk his ideas out with, or how much time might Chris need before he can respond and have that discussion with Chris? So you want to look at where is your team? It's a pretty good balance actually of reserved and outgoing on the team, and mid-range, you've got kind of a very even split here on the people factor. With patients though, you've got Chris and Bobby who are very fast-paced, Chris extremely fast-paced, where you've got Carol who's very patient and tolerant, and everybody else is kind of in the mid-range there. People high fast-paced tend to come to decision quickly. They tend to speak and think very quickly. They can connect dots of what seem like somewhat unrelated ideas or vaguely related ideas, where people that are high patient prefer to go through each individual thing one at a time and make sure that they truly understand. They tend to also be more relational. They tend to be more compassionate, more tolerant with people, where people high fast paced are very, very logical. They're very results oriented. And so again, here you see kind of a blend of results and relationship with fast-paced and patient. It's not a one-to-one match, but something to look for on this team. So as a facilitator, I go through each of these with the team, help them explain this, explain what high planned looks like, explain what spontaneous looks like, and talk about where you might see challenges on the team. Again, if we were looking just at John and Chris and that dynamic on the team of bringing John on, you see that John is kind of mid-range here, which is probably good for a team taking that fast-paced logical. John's going to also be able to take into consideration the people impact of that, the relational impact of those results that we're trying to drive. So that might be a good counterbalance to Chris, especially because he's not so far on the other side that he can't flex into driving that logic and task focus. They're kind of both in the mid-range on structure. So people high spontaneous will tend to be more instinctive. People high planned will tend to be more systematic. And then people in the mid-range can kind of flex more easily between the two. With trust, again, you see that Chris is very, very skeptical. And then John is fairly trusting. So again, this is an interesting dynamic for the two of them. It may, again, be very good to have this counterbalance. It may end up being something that they have to work on in terms of being able to come toward each other. Chris will ask very difficult questions. He will want to control information. He will want to make sure that he has as much detail as possible. He may have a hard time delegating decisions. He may have a hard time even delegating authority to John, where John is going to take things at face value more often. He's going to tend to be the benefit of the doubt and be a little bit more flexible about how he gets work done. And then as you continue to look at now, how do they maintain balance and generate growth in business? This is a fairly pioneering team. So you've got everybody kind of in the mid-range or a high pioneer. Really only Doug would fall out on that more content side and just barely. So this is a very driven team. They're going to be driven to try new things. They're going to be driven to get things done. They probably will be fairly competitive. Now, Chris is much higher pioneering than the rest of the team. So his vision is probably the one that people will follow, but maybe not as fervently or as quickly as Chris seems to see and follow those things. John's right on that line in the middle there. And then with risk, we talked about this when we saw those top two behaviors at the top of the report. So John, extremely cautious and conservative, where Chris is extremely risk-taking. I see this as potentially the biggest challenge with these two folks working together. If they've done this deliberately, and if they've sat down and talked about their differences here and how they're going to use those differences as strengths for the organization, I think it'll work really well. But this is going to be an area that they're constantly going to have to check in with each other on, that they're probably constantly going to have to maintain, and that they may want some of those folks in that mid-range to help broker a midpoint for them. Because Chris is going to be very, very driven to take big, bold action, big risk. And John is going to be kind of seeing all of the scenarios where that could go wrong, looking for all of the contingencies. And so this, I would say, of all of the scores that we've seen, this one would give me the most pause about how naturally these two are going to work together. And what I think they're going to have to do is be very intentional, especially in the area of risk-taking, about how they're going to collaborate and where decisions are going to come and what's going to happen if John feels like they're making a huge mistake and Chris feels like they can't afford not to take this next step. And then with creativity, again, people high anchored are going to be very practical, very experience-based, looking for a template and a best practice for doing things, where people high creative are going to sort of start with something original, try new things, do things a little bit differently. So you see that John falls a little bit more on the anchored side too, which is probably good for operations. So in operations, you're going to want to do repeatable process. But he's pretty close to the line on creative. So I think he can bring some new ideas and some fresh ideas to the organization. And he'll have the natural inclination to operationalize those ideas. he'll have to work with his more creative counterparts to help them see where they fit in the operation and how to make things operational. So those are the kinds of things that I look for in a report. I typically will ask the team questions as they get to each of these areas. How do you see this showing up? Where do you struggle if you're, at the low end and the high end working together? Low and high don't actually mean low and high. It's just, are you stronger on anchored? Or are you stronger on creative? Both are strengths. So this is usually very rich conversation for teams to talk about how this shows up in organizations. So as you get more comfortable describing each of these traits, you can talk through how they might show up. And then I also prepare by looking at where might their strengths and struggles be. Again, based on their top 2 behavioral traits, you'll see that, Chris is very good at taking initiative and being goal-driven and trying new things, accepting challenges, going into new areas, facing danger. But that may come at the cost of a balanced life or being overly vigorous about the goals that he's trying to make or overly ambitious about things, and may take unnecessary risk, which is probably why he's, maybe asked John to come into the team. So John is going to be more careful about planning things. He's going to see the dangers. He's going to be more calculated in his decision making. He's going to think things through. He's going to ask difficult questions. So, you'll see here, as you work with the team, what their behavioral strengths and struggles are. This is often a really great thing to share with team members so that they can reference their strengths and struggles and then how to communicate with each person on the team. So with Chris, if I can give him a big picture and some action plans, keep him up to date on our progress and some opportunities. And then with John, I want to minimize risk. I want to give him some logic and let him do some analysis. So you get this for each team member. And this really is part of the power of DNA, which gives you kind of a guide with the strengths and struggles and the communication keys, kind of gives you a roadmap for how to work best with that person. I find that it is even more advantageous when you have them share what resonates most about those descriptions. When they're able to do that, they tend to take ownership of those behaviors for themselves, and then they also share with their team how to approach them when they see this struggle happening, or how to keep them going when they see that they're really working in a strength, how to encourage that. How to communicate best with them. So I find that having the team members themselves highlight what really feels true to them and how their teammates can work well with them can be a very powerful part of the exercise, going through the strengths and struggles and communication keys. So my hope is that that's given you some ideas for how to prepare for facilitation and some things that you can do as you're walking a team through a team report. You can always contact us at dnabehavior.com and we'll be happy to work with you. Thanks for joining us.